All right, Jonathan, thank you so much for joining us. It's a pleasure to have you.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So let's get started here. You are one of the country's leading experts on universal design. And I asked a very high-end property manager yesterday if he knew what universal design was. And this was somebody who's been working in high-end custom homes for a long time. And he said, no, I don't know. I never heard of it. Most people haven't heard of it. So we are here to educate and enlighten. Please tell us, so what is universal design? Can you give us a little history of how it got started, what it's about?
Yeah, not a problem. Yeah, you're right. A lot of people haven't heard of it. But we're here at the Idea Center at University at Buffalo trying to spread the word and make sure more and more people hear about it. The concept of universal design, the term was coined back in 1985 by Ron Mace, and he had come up with a definition of that. And the basic idea is that an environment should work well for everybody without having to have some sort of adaptation or specialized design. And that's sort of paraphrasing the early definition of it that he had come up with. And over the years, the U.S. federal government got involved and has heard of the concept, and they started funding research into universal design and how we could, improve the built environment. In 1999, the University at Buffalo took over that grant. It had been held by North Carolina State University for 5 years. And since 1999, the University at Buffalo and our Idea Center here has held that grant. I think there was like a 1-year gap where they didn't, run the grant or something. But and so we'll be basically going on 25 years when our current cycle ends in 2025. We'll be going on 25 years of holding the grant. And so during that time, we've really advanced the concept of universal design quite a bit. We've improved upon the definition, trying to get more adoption, and we can talk about that as we go. But the way we define universal design is that it's a process that enables and empowers a diverse population by improving human performance, health and wellness, and social participation. And so the key to that, so one thing that's unique about that definition is the idea of it being a process. That universal design, or UD as we call it, is contextual, and it can always be improved. There's always a higher level of performance that you can try to accommodate for. And depending on what the baseline is in a certain state, country, region, or whether you're looking at residential versus commercial, there's different baselines of what's there. And so, just raising the bar above those baselines, what's universal in one place might not be in another. And I know that sounds kind of funny, universal sounds like it's sort of one size fits all, but that's not what we really mean. We mean universal in the context of that it's they would be everywhere and apply to everything. And so at the Idea Center, we call it inclusive design. But universal design is the term that's more well known, and that's what our grant funders use. So we go with that. The next part of the definition is that it enables and empowers. So it's not just about being able to do something, but to do it well, to do it comfortably, the way you want to on your own terms. For a diverse population. And so that means that UD, it's for everybody. We want to look at everyone who will use a space and think about how it can be better for them, whether it's children, older people, people who don't speak the prevailing language in the region, anyone who's outside, the average. But here's the thing: most of us are outside the average in one way or another. If you look at any one attribute, we're all going to have something that makes us different. Maybe you're average height and average weight with average abilities, but you're left-handed. And so that makes you in the minority for that one attribute. And I'm sure everyone listening can think of something that puts them, at the end of the curve for something. And that's what makes us also diverse. And then the last part of the definition are those improvement areas. Human performance. So we want to improve human performance. So that's things like body fit and comfort, physical things, but also cognitive things like awareness, being aware of the environment around you or what you need to do to accomplish a task, and understanding. And then so some other improvement areas are health and wellness. So staying safe, preventing disability, enabling people to be their best selves. And then the last part is social participation, which involves social integration, not like a separate, wheelchair accessible entrance around the back. Personalization, giving people choice and the option to adapt the environment to them to some degree, and cultural appropriateness, and responding to context. And so we think that definition helps, solidify the concept around, what is it, what does it do, who does it help, and what are we trying to achieve? What are the outcomes we're trying to achieve?
Right. So, first question is, this is applied to the built environment. It seems to me like UD can be applied to other types of designs, right? Like designing a chair, I guess a chair is part of the built environment, but like a product like we use, like a telephone.
Yes.
Or,
Absolutely.
a computer, right?
Absolutely. UD does go beyond buildings. We talk about it a lot of times in terms of the built environment because we're in the School of Architecture and Planning here at UB. So that's how we came up with it. And that's how, when we first started looking at the concept, that's what it was. But, the term design sort of makes people think of the built environment. But a lot of things are designed. So whether that's a school curriculum or products or websites or even service delivery. And now in the technological age, we have, things that are more integrated. So you have, you might have a building that's a part of a service that has a website and an app. Think about like just, an airport, for example. There's so many things going on. You've got the app and to manage your flights and know where you got to go and the gates, and you've got different services all happening there, food service and the travel service, obviously. So there's all these different things going on, plus the building itself. Yeah. And so how can those things all be integrated in a way that's helpful for everyone? And so but it could just be service delivery on its own. It could just be whether it's customer service operation. For an online retailer that doesn't actually have a brick and mortar location, right? Could just be, providing that service through a website. What types of support do they have? How accessible is the website to people with different, adaptive technologies on the computer, or accessing it mobile, or on a laptop versus on your phone, and all those different things. So yeah, universal design is well beyond that. And we think in our new definition, I think when I talked about it, I talked about the physical environment a little bit, but the definition doesn't have that, just enables and empowers a diverse population by improving human performance, health and wellness, social participation. That could be in any context.
Gotcha. That makes sense. And I think a lot of people kind of confuse universal design, people who know a little bit more, universal design with accessible design, right? They're not the same thing. Accessible design, at least in the United States, seems to be kind of like a more limited baseline, right? It's a minimum standard that you have to meet in certain spaces by law, whereas universal design says that minimum standard usually isn't even good enough. We can do so much better, and here's how we do that. Is that correct?
Yeah. And I think a lot of the reason why people conflate the two, I think it's because people who have a disability have needs that are more specific and can be defined very easily. So for somebody who doesn't have that particular disability, it requires more attention and research to be able to implement a solution that works for them because they don't have that personal experience to be able to do it. So they have to look it up or something. Wheeled mobility in particular has the most visible impact on space requirements. So when we're trying to show visualizations or floor plans, in terms of a building, we're always giving these different space requirements based on research of wheel mobility users. And so unfortunately, that sometimes sort of makes people think, well, this is just about wheelchair users. They're just the ones who require typically more space to turn and maneuver. I think people with disabilities are often the part of the population who's the most disadvantaged by a typical design, and therefore they have the most to gain from universal design. And so that can, cause people to sort of think universal design is about people with disability, but it's really, it's really about everybody. Anyone who's been marginalized by typical design practice. So that could be children, older people, pregnant people, very tall, very short, low vision, blind, difficulty hearing, doesn't know the language, can't read, cognitive disability, anxiety, PTSD, autism. And then of course, people who use wheel mobility devices as well. But people carrying packages, are disadvantaged too. People who have a broken arm that's temporary, people who have invisible disabilities. There's some people who just, have poor stamina. They can't walk very far. They don't look like they have a disability. A lot of cognitive disabilities come in that way as well. So it's really for everybody and trying to improve performance for everyone.
And how much of the scientific research do you have to use when you're designing a space, right? So for example, I think of performance, and I think of so many spaces that I've been to that are super echoey, right? They're restaurants, for example, just something, let's pick something basic. You go to a restaurant, you can barely hear the person next to you because it's so loud and so echoey. Your brain is processing way more information that way. It does usually create a little bit more anxiety and stress. You don't enjoy the experience as much of being in that place. If you're in a work environment, it could be even more pronounced, right? It's lack of concentration. You're easily distracted. So I think that like the performance side of things, that's one thing that I would point to that says that's not necessarily tied to disability, but I would wager that it also helps people with cognitive impairments, people with, attention deficit disorder, like autism, right? All of those factors come in, but so it's two-part question. One is talk about like some concrete performance things that you guys do, and then how much of the scientific research do you have to dive into when you're doing those designs in order to make sure you're doing it correctly?
So I think a lot of what we do, so we developed a tool for this because we know that designers, we don't usually do the design ourselves. We'll help designers who've been hired to do a space, and we help them make it more inclusive or universal. And so we've developed a tool called the Innovative Solutions for Universal Design at thisisud.com. And this tool basically takes that research and boils it down into certain, steps. Do this, and this in these areas. And you get to choose, how many you're going to do. We give credits for that, and we will certify buildings that do a certain number that, of those solutions in each space. But we basically say, here are the things that we can do that are beyond code that will make the environment better for everybody. So we've taken all of our research and we've synthesized it down into these about 500 solutions that help make it easier for people. Now, of course, these are voluntary; nobody has to do them, and so the struggle is getting people to use these solutions where they are. It's not too hard. Like you talked about acoustics in a restaurant. The reason they're not thinking about that is because they're not thinking about acoustics. They're thinking about food and food service and getting food to people and making people enjoy their time at the restaurant. And so their acoustics isn't at the top of their mind. Whereas if you're designing, like a concert venue, the architect might hire an acoustic consultant to tell them, here's the best way to make the place sound good, because that's what the space is for. Yep. But it doesn't mean that acoustics aren't important in a restaurant. It's not at the top of people's mind, and they're not going and spending money on an acoustic consultant. They're thinking about, well, how does the space look? They're also usually smaller, so there's fewer people in the room to make decisions. You might just have like an owner right? Who's making decisions like, oh, I like the way this looks, and I like the way that looks, and I want the ceiling painted black, and whatever it is. Whereas if you're designing like a concert venue, there's a lot of money involved, a lot of stakeholders at the table, and there's somebody there to chime in and say, we want to have the best sounding music, right? And so yes, we should spend the money to hire the consultant. And so there's a lot of competing interests. Or there's a lot of different interests that people have when they have a building. And so, their primary focus, isn't always what other people think are important.
Of course.
We see that with lighting too, lighting in a restaurant. A lot of people, it's too dark, and people just aren't thinking about that. A lot of times when they design a restaurant, they're just thinking of the ambiance or whatever.
But that isn't that a big lesson with universal design, is that there's so much more to think about in the design process. Like, that can seem daunting, but the benefits are also huge if you do it right.
Yeah, that is what we try to tell people, that it's important to think of everything. If you want to accommodate everybody, accommodate as many people as possible, give people the most enjoyable experience, you need to think about everything. Restaurants is tough because a lot of times they're small, independently owned. When you start looking at bigger companies and bigger places, they've got, whole teams of people who are looking at marketing and imaging and how we look and all of that. And even then, they can sometimes get it wrong because they want a cool aesthetic and have it all dark, and they want a young, hip audience, right? So they don't care about, this other crowd sometimes. So, it can be a double-edged sword having a larger group too. It all depends on what their objectives are. It's really all about priority and value. What do you value as a company, or as a person? Do we value inclusion enough to make sure that we're doing everything we can compared to all the other things that we value, like having a good ambiance and having a young, hip crowd, or whatever it is that you're trying to get to your establishment?
That makes sense. So
the thing is, when it comes to architects, the whole job of an architect is to manage competing things. They have all these different consultants, and we've got heating ducts, and we've got the structure, and we've got the lighting, and we've got all these other code requirements, and zoning setbacks and everything. The job of the architect is to manage all these constraints and figure out how to work them together. And so you don't have to choose between having a young, hip crowd and having good lighting in a restaurant. You don't have to choose between those. You can find creative ways of making sure that everybody's accommodated and still have the ambiance you want. It doesn't have to be a choice.
Right. It's a lack of awareness and a lack of information, really, right? At the end of the day, because if you're doing it from the beginning, do you have a general idea of like what the additional costs, like, an additional cost would be to make the space more inclusive, let's say take something simpler, wheelchair users? Yeah,
I mean, we've found that sometimes, well, first of all, in public space for wheelchair users, it's really no extra cost because, the law mandates wheelchair accessibility, from the start. Now, to provide a little bit extra room in certain areas beyond the minimums, some people just try to look at this number and say, well, it's this many extra square feet to do an extra 7 inches here, and therefore that increases the cost by this much. But that's not really the case. You can plan a building so that space doesn't come from areas where you need it, where you need it someplace else. And so if you have a smart and efficient circulation plan, for example, that doesn't have wasted space, you can do that. I can't tell you the number of floor plans I've looked at that've got so many dead end, sort of wasted spaces in a building. And then they say, oh, well, we can't fit this in the bathroom here. Well, if the circulation plan had been more efficient from the start, you could have. So you do really have to think about it from the beginning. I don't know. There's a lot of challenges and barriers, and overcoming the cost misconception is definitely one of them. Certain things, and because it's a process, there's always something better and more expensive, but that's really true of anything, right? Like you can always have a nicer toilet, right? That has more features on it. You can always have nicer lighting or different, better paint, paint fixtures, nicer quality features, a nicer looking bar. You can always upgrade the materials. There's always something nicer out there, right? And so, yeah, can universal design cost more? Sure. It becomes a problem a lot of times, I think, in residential areas, when you're looking at an individual homeowner trying to buy something. Well, yeah, a kitchen with pull-out drawers and shelves is great, but guess what? Every pull-out drawer costs more money. So you can get the base cabinets that don't cost that, or kitchens are expensive to begin with, right? So they'll say, well, this is going to cost more. And in some cases, especially in residential where houses are always built, up off the ground, sometimes it does cost more because you got to dig down deeper to get a full basement. If you lower the house by a foot, well, that's an extra foot you might have to dig if you want a full basement, right? So, okay, that's why we sort of encourage at the development level, at the neighborhood level. If you're looking at a large area of land, what can we do across the whole area that provides easy access the way the whole site has been graded? So if you're doing 50 houses, how can we grade the whole site so that it's not at that individual level? But I could talk all day about a lot of the challenges to implementing universal design.
Yeah, but again, the overall theme seems to be the earlier you plan and think about it, the better off you're going to be, and the better the long-term solutions are going to be, right? Because most of this, I see this with my business all the time, is we get brought in late to the party, and then of course making the changes that the client may or may not want, then it costs time and money. But if it had been done in the beginning, it would have been 10 times easier, right? And the cost would have been, whatever the client is willing to spend would have been more aligned with what they actually want.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, one great example of this is our door, wider doors. If you have a house and it's got 30 or 32-inch doors, to go and widen all those doors to 36 is a big expense once the house is built. But to do it beforehand, $100 for the whole house, right? Right. It's really not a lot of money, in the grand scheme of things, and it makes it easier to move furniture in and out of rooms without denting your walls. So, why shouldn't people just do that? Okay, maybe they don't use a wheelchair, but they do probably have a dresser or a bed they need to carry into that bedroom at some point, moving in and out, and don't want to dent their new walls. So, that extra $100 when you're spending that much on a house, there's easy ways where you can get the $100 back out of the house, from something else that makes it worth it. And it's especially difficult, widening doors once the house is built is, always going to be more expensive because you're tearing apart a wall. But what if the walls have been placed that you can't even do that because there's another intersecting wall, so you can't even widen the door if you want to, because the way the house has been laid out. So it really does create a problem down the line. We like to compare it to sustainability. Yeah, it costs more to have a more, green building up front. Solar panels or whatever it is you're doing to that building can cost more up front, but over a period of time, it saves money. So, an LED light bulb, yeah, that costs more than incandescent up front, but if it lasts 10 times longer, and it doesn't cost 10 times as much, it only costs, I don't want to give a number here because I don't know the prices that well, but, let's say hypothetically it costs 3 times as much, but it saves you 10 times. Well, that's great. The problem with universal design is it's not as easy to quantify as that, because you don't have that energy. You don't have that energy bill to hold on to. We're talking about, employee productivity, which is always very subjective. How do you measure that? And so one of the ways that we think we can improve adoption of universal design is by doing more research to help prove the long-term value of it. And we've started doing that, with our ISUD solutions, comparing buildings that have used it versus ones that haven't. The same buildings with the same people who've moved from the non-universally designed to a universally designed building, seeing, doing surveys on that. But it is very difficult to quantify, and getting more research to prove the value for everyone, that it's, it helps everybody. And so, that's what we're trying to do with our research is try to get that evidence to show, hey, we might not be able to show, exact dollars and cents, this light bulb versus that one, but show that it can improve productivity, satisfaction with the space, whatever it is.
Yep. Or just, so if it's a commercial building, right, that if it's more inclusive, then you can easily measure once people know, right? You can easily measure, well, how many more wheelchair users have come here? How many more low vision people have come to the space and have shopped there and have spent time there? Like there are things that we can measure to say, look, there are real economic incentives for doing this. We just need to get over that mental block, that it's not worth it, or that the tried and true, whatever that is good enough, right? It's these mental blocks that we need to kind of break down with people.
Yeah, it's getting past that, the misconception of cost. But I mean, first you have to get over, there's the lack of knowledge and awareness, to begin with. So that's the first one. A lot of people will say, well, there's no demand for it, that's why they don't do it. There's no demand, but demand, some people don't know what they want yet. Demand can be created. Look at the iPhone as an example, right? I don't know, 25 years ago, when cell phones were just, not everybody had a cell phone, a couple of people had them for work or whatever. Yeah. If you told them, hey, how about we put a whole computer in your pocket? They'd be like, that's crazy. why do I need that?
Why do I need unwieldy. Why do I need a computer in my pocket? Yeah. Or, Facebook, all the great companies create their own demand.
Yeah. Facebook's another great example. Like who would have thought that would be, as big as it is today. And so, if people aren't asking for something, it's maybe because they don't know that they would want it. And especially in housing, where people have grown up with housing that's been sort of the same for 100 years, they might not know that, hey, that's something I want. You don't know you want the pull-out drawer until you've had a house that's had the pull-out drawer and realize how much easier it is in the kitchen and nicer it is. It's sort of like, well, a lot of people talk about like this, a slow creep, like if you're something you have to watch out for. The older you get, maybe the more money you make in your career, right? And so the more things you start to buy, right? And so you're like, once you buy a new car, you kind of always want a new car. You don't want to go back to used. Or once you hire somebody to mow your lawn for you, now, that's an expense that you pay that, or shovel your driveway or whatever it is, have it made, have somebody clean your house for you. Once you experience that, it's tough to go back, right? Yep. And so, but I'm sure if you ask a lot of people, hey, would you like to have somebody clean your house for you? They'd be like, yeah, yeah, I'd love that. I don't want to pay for it, but yeah, I'd love that. So if there's a way that it can be done in a way that the cost isn't that much greater by thinking early and planning ahead, that would be great, and people sort of realize that, right? I mean, people put vinyl siding on their house. Not that I love vinyl siding, but it's easy to maintain, right? So why are people doing it? Because they don't want to have to clean and repaint and do all this stuff. They've realized it's easier. And so sure, they'll spend the money to put that on instead of repointing the brick. They'll just slap some vinyl over it, right? It's not very good looking, but they've realized that there's some value there that to them, and it doesn't cost a lot, right? So, yeah. Not a great example because vinyl is not exactly the nicest material, but it's it's something that people will go for,
Yeah, it proves the point. Do you see any trends in building or just in general? Like I'm thinking of aging in place, where kind of we can piggyback off of the momentum that's being built there and make universal design just break that awareness barrier, right? So there's more people who are, we have an aging population in the United States, Canada, Japan, Australia. People want to live in their homes longer as opposed to going to assisted living facilities or nursing homes, right? There's going to be more and more momentum with that and more demand for.
We talk about that a lot. Yeah, as a reason that people should do it. The problem that we have and that they have as well is that a lot of people, until they get to that age, they have what we call Peter Pan syndrome. They don't think they'll ever grow old. Well, that won't be me. Or by the time they do realize it, it's already, well, they already have their house, the house is built. It's like already too late, right? When they're first buying their house, they're not thinking of it, right? And it's not until they see, what's happening to their parents or something, and then they're going, oh, that's going to happen to us. Well, our house is already built and our kids are already out of the house too. So it can be a bit late, and people tend to adapt to their surroundings. They don't like, a lot of people don't like change. And so that can be an issue as well.
So where do you see a solution for that?
Well, I think it's better education and better communication of the concept. That's why, we revised that, definition with the improvement areas and clear outcomes. I also think education and design schools, I think a lot of design schools too often focus on visual forms of meeting some sort of, or meeting like a performance metric rather than function and usability. And so I think if we did that, people will be more perceptive to it. And we can use these arguments as reasons why these should go into schools, right? Well, we need to start teaching kids, who are going to be designers now, because look at the demographics. And, in an educational setting, people will buy that. they'll say, okay, yes, we look at the statistics and we realize this, and we should adjust our curriculum, right? But to get to each individual buyer at that level becomes an issue. So I think that's really the key is, better education and communication of the concept. And I think sort of seeing it too. I mean, seeing it around, company having greater adoption. Like I said, once you see it and you like it, then you're more likely to demand it. Why don't I have that in my house? And so, you see that all the time in housing, right? I don't know what we could, what's a good example in housing? Closet space, right? Closet space has gone up drastically in years, right? And once people have those big closets, they love their big closets, right? And now they demand it, and now they build new houses with big closets, right? Whereas back in the 30s, they said, I don't need that much stuff, so I've got a basement, right? But once you have it, you want it and you demand it, and you see other people having it. The same thing with the iPhone, right? Yeah. I don't need a computer in my pocket until you saw everybody else using one, and then, oh, this is actually pretty good. It's kind of nice to have.
Absolutely. And to build off your point earlier, right, where we should, the educational component, say the AIA, the ASID, it always fascinates me that there's such a blind spot there, because if you look at, let's say you look at a car is engineered first and foremost to be able to function, right? To function reliably within those parameters, or to meet some kind of performance spec. Within that basic, function first, right? Form follows function.
Right. Yeah.
Look at how many amazingly good-looking, beautiful cars there are in the world, but we don't look at home design in the same way. It's aesthetics first, which makes no sense to me. Like, it's just, where did this blind spot come from when we don't do that with so many of the other products and things that we use on a day-to-day basis?
Well, I think what happened, a lot of universal design, I think we can trace back to the start of modernism. There was the idea of form follows function. And I talked a little bit about how, a lot of design schools would focus on aesthetics, but also on like these performance metrics. So we sort of do that with homes a little bit, right? We talk about the insulation value and R values to save on the heating costs, and that's we're talking about the performance of the home and high efficiency, furnaces, good performance and good energy performance windows. So we do talk about performance in a similar way to cars. We talk about, well, how 0 to 60 or whatever miles per gallon, whatever performance metric you want to do. But then I could also argue that cars, how designed are they to be comfortable for the user? how many women can't put their purse anywhere in the car, right? Because nobody thought about that. And so every time I drive my car, if my wife is in the passenger seat, she's got the purse like under her feet, right? So like there are things that aren't considered, you know, but you know, the automotive industry, and the reason why adjustable seats came about was because of the automotive industry. When it was basically truck drivers, a lot of them went off to war, and women would start taking jobs as truck drivers, and they couldn't reach the pedals or whatever it was, you know, steering wheel. And so they said, well, we need to have adjustable seats. And then they started putting them in all the cars. You know, adjustable seats were a great idea. And so, you know, you can learn, you know, when you have different people, when you have diversity, you can learn from that diversity. And now you wouldn't think of making a car without adjustable seats, right? So you can do the same thing in housing, but you know, it takes a while too. Like I said, people don't like change, you know, and especially in construction. You know, unlike the automotive industry where they're, you know, well, first of all, everybody, all the engineers designed the car, went to school for that, right? And then there's always some new technology, right? So you have to really stay up on it. But you know, in construction, you know, a lot of those trade skills are passed down generation to generation. You know, but the thing is, you know, architects go to school, right? So if that education works its way into architecture schools, just like new vehicle technology makes its way into automotive engineer schools, then that can help get it out there more.
Yep. No, those are good points. Those are good points. Do you have any good examples of livable spaces that you guys have helped design that you feel are like a really positive, you know, really positive success story that you can highlight? Maybe we can, you know, the audience can go and visit the website, see photos, explore that.
Yeah. So on our website, our ISUD website, thisisud.com, there's some features. I forget exactly what you click on. At the top menu, there's something there, either a press room or featured items that you can go to and see some of the buildings that have used it. Procter and Gamble, for instance, used it on one of their new facilities, and that's one of the ones we've partnered with to do research. You know, as people move from the old facility to the new space that was an addition. The Children's Museum of Pittsburgh built what they're calling the Museum Lab, an extension of the museum. They, I believe, we're calling them the first ISUD certified building. Uniland Development Company did a Hampton by Hilton branded hotel right here in Amherst, which is a suburb of Buffalo, where we're from. So they used the ISUD, and then they liked it so much they went and used it again. And so I believe for each of those three, there's a little feature on the website that talks about them. You know, what's so universally designed. There's a few pictures up there as well. And we've got some other big ones in the pipeline I can't name, you know, just confidentially, they haven't started yet, that sort of thing. So we've got a pretty big partner that we're working in the next couple of months. We're going to go out and survey some existing sites around the country and offer suggestions. We've presented for them before, so you know, we have things in the pipeline as well. And then in terms of housing, you know, I co-authored a book called Inclusive Housing: A Pattern Book. It's about 10 years old now. There's links to buy that. We also have a website called udeducation.org where people can go and we have all sorts of online continuing education classes where people can learn about it. We offer continuing education credit for architects in the US for taking these courses, but anybody can take them. They're designed for anybody to be able to take a lot of them. But that website also, in addition to the online courses, has links to purchase all these publications and has a whole list of recommended publications. There's a resources menu item where they've got that. There are some free resources there, that some older stuff of ours that we had done as well, some older publications. There are some free downloads. Universal Design New York too. We've been commissioned by New York City to design a guidebook on universal design for them. That's up there for free. So there's that, and there's links to other recommended publications as well. So those would all be great places to go to get more information on universal design, but also the ISUD website to see examples of this in practice as well.
Yeah, I've signed up for a course and I look forward to taking
Yes, I think,
several more. So, you know,
you may be, I think you're in it now.
yeah, I'm in it. Yeah, correct. So
Yeah.
it's awesome. I think the interesting thing there, right, is why do you think, besides money, because money is, you know, always a factor in our lives, but besides money, do you think there's a reason, a deeper reason, or additional reasons why companies seem to be leading the way in this?
Yeah, I think the reason for that is, you know, like we're seeing a lot of this in like disability and inclusion, you know, wings of a company, you know, that department or whatever. I think a lot of companies, they see a value in being seen as socially responsible, in so, you know, in some ways, right? A company, they always want to try to look good, you know, whatever it is they're doing, you know, whether you're a petroleum company or whatever it is you're doing, they always want to try to look good to the public, to have a positive perception. And so, you know, any big company wants to do, they want to be seen as doing right by their employees and so on and so forth. And they hate any negative media attention that might come if they're, you know, their employees dislike this or that, right? And so I think we start to see that from a disability, from a diversity and inclusion perspective. You know, they you know, especially, you know, the times we're in, you know, making sure that the company is treating women, you know, minorities equally as everyone else. And so disability usually falls under that umbrella. Well, are we making sure disability is taken care of as well? And so they want to be seen as socially responsible, whereas every single Joe Schmo, well, I see lots of people post stupid stuff on the internet, right? They don't necessarily care too much about, you know, not everybody cares about their image as well as a giant company is, because it doesn't mean millions or billions of dollars to them, right? You know, I shouldn't use me as an example, but if, you know, if just any person walking down the street were to, you know, say the wrong thing or do something silly or say something that was bad about, you know, a person with a disability, it wouldn't really affect them financially. You know, might for me, you know, if I were on video saying something bad, you know, okay, well, I work in the field, I guess that would affect me. But just anybody else, you know, if you're a construction worker and you're caught on tape saying something bad, well, it might not really affect you. But if a company is thought of in the media as not being friendly to a certain group of people, that can blow up on Twitter and, you know, sink their stock, and it costs millions or billions of dollars. So they see a value there that not everybody else necessarily has to see. And so you know, it's tough to bring it back to dollars and cents like that, but I think that's, you know, that's why you're seeing it, you know, in companies is, you know, there is a value there. And I'm not saying that's the only reason why, right? It's not always just about money. Of course, people want to always have everybody think the best of them. But I, you know, that can be a good impetus to make sure you act on it and, you know, make sure you drive it home. You know, if there's
we just need to keep creating more incentives, right? And hopefully, as more of these buildings get built and people are happier in them, it's just going to give people more reason to, yeah, of course, why wouldn't we want to do this? For homes,
yeah,
you know, it's a little trickier, but there's always the possibility that a celebrity embraces it, right? An influencer embraces it, makes it the thing to do for a lot of people. But on the podcast,
possible, sure.
Yeah, on the podcast this week, it was interesting. Like I spoke with Julie Sawchuk, and she's helping accessible design in Canada. So when she was I think when she was 40, she had a spinal cord injury. She was hit by a car. And when she came back from the hospital, what she said in the podcast is like I think 3 of her best friends, before she even got back from the hospital, had already modified their homes to make it accessible so that she could visit, feel comfortable, hang out, right? Like that's a really good story. but
Yeah.
it's also important, and it just points back to that. A, we never know what's going to happen to us, but B, what if we have a friend who has a disability, or multiple friends, or we just want to have that idea of, I want my home to be inclusive. I don't want to, not let people into my home because I didn't think of something very basic in the design process that I could have thought of.
Yeah, absolutely. The statistics on it, and again, it's really just getting people to know this stuff. But, most people, they move homes every 8 to 10 years or so. They find a new place to live every 8 to 10 years on average, at least in the US. I believe that's gone up a little bit in recent years. But, when you look at the longevity of a house, the house itself lasts 75, 100 years or more in many cases. And so the odds of somebody with, a mobility limiting disability living in that house at any given point in time, it's 25% that over the lifespan of the house, at some point, somebody's going to be living there that's got a disability. If you include friends or visitors with disability, they computed that to be like a 97% possibility that every single given house built will have a visitor with a disability, and I don't know, I guess at least once in that house, and so, hey, if you're willing to do it for your friends, you have a friend, okay, great. But if, let's say, you're in charge of building 50 houses, well, why not make them all so that, somebody with a disability can visit any of them? And we've got options too. Another thing we're working on at the Idea Center is this stock plans for housing. We've got affordable versions as well that we're working on. They're basically done, and we have it's on our website, idea.ap.buffalo.edu. There's a link to the stock houses. Not all the plans are up there yet, but the project page is up, and we're hoping to get those up, get all the plans up there soon. There's just some error checking and stuff we're doing on them. But it can be affordable, and it really depends too. A lot of it is just making it so that you can install these features, later, right? Like I said, to widen a door, afterwards is difficult. So you just do it from up front. Well, that might be $100, right? Okay, so all the fancy stuff in the kitchen might cost a little more, but guess what? Appliances come and go over time. You can always swap out appliances. You can always put in new drawer, add a drawer to the base cabinet later if you need it, right? But is the kitchen designed to allow it, right? It doesn't have to be expensive, and we've got options out there as well. In that book I talked about, Inclusive Housing, a pattern book, it's got some options for housing in there as well. It's got some floor plans laid out, but a lot of it is, lighting. Well, I don't know who puts the first light bulbs in the house. I guess the contractor does, right? But next time you go to put light bulbs in, that's usually the homeowner who's going and replacing light bulbs, right? So could you have good lighting? But could the house be wired to have lighting, in the right way? A light switch near the bed, right? Or whatever it is. There's a lot of houses that used to be built. They didn't have any light switches. It was just plug in floor lamps, right? There's lots of things that we can think about when designing a house that don't really necessarily cost a lot of extra money, that wouldn't be thought of as extravagant, like having lights, right? In a room. There's a lot that can be done.
Can you take that? I'm imagining you can take that same principle with bathrooms, right? So you don't have to do the whole make it super, in a private home. You don't have to make it accessible for everyone. Yeah, but you can have the plywood backing so that it's easy to put in grab bars later. You can have
around the shower.
Right, all around the shower.
I would say put a 0-step shower in. That gets a little tricky when there's one bathroom, because a lot of people like to be able to bathe their kids in a tub. Some people like to soak. So that's tough when there's only one bathroom. That really comes down to preference. I think the trend is turning more towards showers now, but I think it's an age thing too. Younger people want showers, and people who have kids or older people want to be able to soak.
They have those.
Don't quote me on that. I know this is going online. I don't know. I have statistics to back me up on that one, but that's just what I've heard.
They have the walk-in tubs now too, though, right? That also make it easier to get in and out of the
They
bathtub.
do. Most people aren't going to install those, right away, but a lot of them can be installed in the same place, right? So you could have the floor design that's strong enough to hold, more water, have the floor strong enough to hold, if they have to cut out, notch the beams to put in a roll and shower in the future, you can do that. So these things, can be done. So it's not too big of an issue. They do make, bathrooms that have adjustable base cabinets that can come out. So you hang the sink on the wall and the base cabinet can be removed later. Or make sure that when you're designing the bathroom, you have enough storage someplace else. So if you do lose that storage under the sink later, you've got it someplace in the bathroom, you've got it nearby. So there's a lot of strategies, that you can use. But again, that becomes difficult in a retrofit, right? We've done a lot of bathroom retrofits for people, where we have to take out their sink, and it's like, well, that's our only storage. Well, we don't really have any other option because we can't just blow out all the walls and move the chimney to give you more storage, very easily. But when you think about it from the start, all that stuff, all those problems go away. So there are some other places where universal designs, being successfully applied as well. It's not just the built environment, like we said. Universal design for learning is a big concept for educators. I think educators, they realize that all children learn differently. They see, every day in the classroom, right? And different kids get different grades, right? Or behave differently. And they've realized that it's not just about, the average kid versus, children with special needs, how it sort of used to be, okay, these kids were in that classroom. I mean, that can be necessary, still, if depending on how different the needs are. But then they also have testing, right? So they're taking these kids are taking tests, and they can see the grades, they can see the improvements, or they can see what's working, what's not working. And so you've got these clearly defined outcomes. So that's all part of ED for learning. And it's really what we're trying to emphasize with the built environment as well. Have clear outcomes. We need to have research that shows that it works, that these outcomes are being achieved, to help convince people that it's necessary. I think UD for learning. Hey, parents are all for making sure that their kids have, the education that they need. Right? There's no disincentive there. There's no competing thing there. But I'm sure if they said, okay, well, this is going to cost you an extra whatever per year, and so, we're going to double your school taxes to do this, people will go, well, wait, how much better is this technique really? So that's the thing is, dispelling some of these misconceptions about cost, and making sure that they understand the value that they are receiving, so that if there is a cost increase, that they're seeing the value directly.
Yeah. I mean, I hope the educational metrics, bear some really positive results, because education has been so standardized. I mean, when I was in high school in the early 1990s, and that was a much different experience than it is today. Same thing with college, but how many kids every year fall through the cracks because the teaching methods are too rigid, because the standardized tests are too limited, or because we don't account for different ways people learn. I mean, the cost on society over a lifetime is enormous.
Right. I mean, we have the debate here in the U.S. about Common Core, right? The whole idea behind Common Core is that here's a bunch of outcomes that they should achieve. And then what happens is you get like textbook manufacturers who are, designing, criteria to a test. And then the teachers, don't like teaching to a test. They like teaching based on kids' needs. And so, you have to be careful that you're not being too prescriptive. Like our ISUD, for example, that's why we've got these voluntary solutions. There is no one magic solution, right, to making sure that this building is accessible, or is universally designed. You've got a lot of different things you could do, and some things will work better than others for different groups. Some things will work better for this group, some things will work better for that group. And so it's picking and choosing, being smart about it, being deliberate about it, thinking about what do I want to achieve with this project. And that's really true of any design project though. Like, do I want to have good sound in here? Yeah, a lot of these things with universal design, if you ask somebody, do you want a building that does better in this way or that way, they'd say yes. And so the question is always, well, how can we just do that and not increase the cost? And so that's important, and not, that's sort of the why we have universal design in addition to these accessibility standards. The law requires this minimum accessibility, but you can design some pretty awful buildings if you just follow the accessibility legislation, right? I could probably design a building that is not very good for wheelchair users, but completely complies with the standard. It would be an interesting challenge for me one day to design the worst possible ADA compliant building. But I'm sure it can be done. And it's the same thing with teaching, right? I mean, you can have standards for teaching, but then you have a test, and if you've got a teacher that just is teaching to the test, well then, but are you really measuring the outcomes? Are the goals being achieved? That's the mission, to achieve the goals. Are they learning certain concepts that they're supposed to be learning? And so you can have something that's too prescriptive as well. And so we try to avoid that with universal design and being too prescriptive. Here's the research, here's some ideas, here's some solutions, we call them solutions, that you can use to help improve the design.
That makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. Is there anything that I missed that you feel is important to talk about?
Well, I think no, I think we kind of hit everything here. I'm looking at some of my notes here, and I think I hit just about everything that I want, that I wanted to talk about when it comes to universal design. I think just the education and that research component, I can't hammer that home enough. To have that research that demonstrates the value to people, having performance-based outcomes that we can measure to help prove the value, and having the education in the right places, having the right people, know about the concept and know what it is, so that they can advocate for it. And one of the things we want to do, at the Idea Center, is to expand and increase the adoption of ISUD, and have ISUD accredited professionals, build a network. So that it really gets out there, similar to what sustainability was able to achieve. I think if we can follow that model, that's a fairly successful model. So we've had some early successes with some of these buildings, but if we can follow that model, we can really take it to another level.
Yeah, and maybe it's just a thought. The thought that just struck me right now is, I think the more we can impress upon architects, especially, right, the amount of responsibility that they have in their hands, that they're shaping the way we live in our world, in our built environment, in our cities, in our homes, pretty much, travel everywhere. The more they get a sense of what that actually means and who they're actually excluding or limiting or, making things more difficult for, if that starts to enter their brain, then they can start to rethink the way they design, right? And what the outcomes are that they should be looking for.
Yeah, I mean, you're not designing a building, you're designing a place for people.
Yeah.
And I think, it goes back again to UD for Learning again, that, teachers have always sort of understood that they're shaping young minds, right? That it's about the person, right? And so, if architects understand that, this building is for people and people should be comfortable in the building to the maximum extent feasible, that's it. I think sometimes they get, you get out of school and you get into practice and you start to think, well, you've got all these other demands, and client wants this and the client wants that and the client wants this, and you're under time crunch and all these other real world sort of issues kind of come into you, and can help you lose your focus on that. Well, I'm just doing what the client wants me to do. The client wants this, that's what I built. And so you have a responsibility there too, and it's good to remember that.
Yep. So I know you've mentioned it a few times on the podcast already, but just one more time, how can people find you? Where do they go? Where can they connect?
So we're a university at Buffalo School of Architecture and Planning. We're one of the only, I think we are the only school in the country that has a concentration in inclusive design. So if you're an architect looking to get, or if you're looking into going into architecture or becoming an architect or getting a master's degree in architecture, our master's program here is the only one with a concentration in inclusive design. And even if you didn't come from a 4-year architecture program, you got your bachelor's of science in something else, then we have a 3.5-year master's program, where the latter half of that is in, you can choose to concentrate in inclusive design. But also for architects, we have udeducation.org, where we have continuing education courses on this and a whole bunch of other resources. Even if you're not an architect, you want to know about universal design, you can take these courses or go and look up all the books on that website, and you can learn more. If you want to learn more about the Idea Center and what we do and the whole ton of projects that we do, that's at idea.ap.buffalo.edu. AP is easy to remember because it's architecture and planning. That's what that stands for. And then lastly, if you're looking at designing a building and you want it to make it universally designed, you want to even get certified universally designed, thisisud.com has that program on there where you can learn all about that, and there's like a free trial where you can see all the solutions and see what's there, what we recommend you do for your building.
Fantastic. I really appreciate the time, the knowledge. I'm really happy we connected, and thank you so much for being here.
Thanks a lot for having me.
Absolutely. Have a good one.
Thanks, you too.